Hello, and welcome. I'm April, the nerdy witch, and we are on a witchful journey. We've made it to a year of podcast episodes. I'm so excited. Anyway, before we really get into today's topic, here's a bit of a content warning. First of all, if you're under 18, stop here and just tune in for episode 27. Not because I'm trying to act like a gatekeeper to any kind of knowledge, I just don't feel like getting in trouble for not saying it. Second, if you are uncomfortable with topics surrounding sex, feel free to duck out for this episode and catch me on the next one. Third, if you're my parents, since I know y'all tune in every now and then, fair warning, you might want to just skip this one. Or don't, your choice. Love you. Fourth, I highly recommend headphones for this episode if you're tuning in and have some ears nearby that you don't necessarily want listening in. And last, I recommend talking with your primary care physician first if you decide to venture into any of the practices that I'm going to be mentioning today. I think that should cover it. Still here? Great. Let's officially open today's episode with a card reading. This week's card comes from the Elemental Empath Oracle deck. For this week's message, we have Sky, Expansion. It's an air card, so it has a lot to do with thoughts and mental states. This particular one is about inner freedom, expanding your consciousness, and befriending yourself, which is actually part of what we'll be talking about today, so this is kind of a perfect starter to the conversation. This card, in talking about inner freedom, asks us to embody freedom in the mind. Create a space where you can experience your mind more as a playground rather than a cage. We want to be flexible in our thinking and open to learning new things and new ideas. Approaching things with curiosity rather than judgment. When we allow ourselves to start thinking this way, we're able to be more creative, more stable, and we begin to recognize our individual flaws and strengths. This is part of expanding our consciousness, starting right where we are in this moment and going from there. Many of us don't even really know where we are exactly in this moment because we, as the human population, are often encouraged not to have time to be alone with our thoughts and our emotions. You probably recognize the drill. Strict kid pick-up and drop-off times, full-time job, after-school activities, time at the gym, time with family, time with friends, sports, expectations to always be involved in community activities, that kind of thing. And with social media and cell phones, we're expected to be reachable at any time. So we have to make a conscious effort to first set aside time for ourselves, and second, to find out more about ourselves. Become friends with our thoughts, our ideas, our emotions, our senses. Despite us being in 2026 now, it seems as though there's still this idea that we should be more robotic. No emotions, especially if they aren't positive ones. No reactions or responses that aren't intensely filtered. Find your niche and stay in it. Find your career and stay in it. The last thing that we really want to do is wish that we were someone else, or something else, or that our life was different somehow. Yes, you can grieve that you missed out on a particular thing in the past, or that you didn't have certain information available to you in the past, or whatever it is that you need to grieve, but don't spiral in it. Sit with it and ask yourself if it's something that the you that you are now would still want. If it's happening in real time, ask yourself, why you wish to be someone else. What is it that you perceive about their life that you wish you had? Why do you wish that you had turned out differently? What is it about yourself that you wish was different? And this is all about learning as much as you can about yourself and discovering that true inner freedom is knowing that you have the power to make changes as you see fit. You don't have to be bound to this version of yourself. But also make sure you ground yourself so your head doesn't end up too far in the clouds. Or it might be the opposite. You may find that you're too rigid, too stuck in a particular way because you're so used to being criticized, whether it's by yourself or by someone else, for trying to change. Allow yourself room to breathe and be more gentle with yourself if needed. A meditation for becoming more aware of yourself in order to expand on your consciousness and have that inner freedom would be to just go find a quiet place to sit and start by noticing what's around you. What sounds do you hear? What senses are you feeling on your body? How your clothes are fitting, the pressure spots on the soles of your feet, your butt, the backs of your legs, however it is that you're sitting. What do you smell? If your eyes are open, what do you see? And then close your eyes, if you haven't already, and start noticing any tastes that are in your mouth. And are your shoulders tight? Does your stomach feel full or empty? Any tingling sensations due to how you're sitting? And then go into your mind and imagine a quiet, lovely place in your mind that you can designate as a safe place. It can be out in the woods, on a ledge overlooking a forest or a beach. It can be in a house, or even on a cloud if you want. In this place, what would you feel? What would you smell? What would you hear? Would you see anything? What is it? Return to this place every day during meditation for at least a couple of weeks. After a while, start envisioning a loving white light. And over time, start practicing becoming one with this light, allowing for the warmth and love that it emanates to merge with your spirit and every cell of your body. It can be hard for some people to get clear imagery in their minds, and for others, this can be a really intense experience. So it's worth noting that you may need a professional to assist with these meditations. Now, I chose Aphrodite as the deity that we'd be discussing today, partly because Valentine's Day was over the weekend. For me, as I'm recording this, it was yesterday. And she is one of the obvious deities of love. The other reason was that because we're approaching spring, I don't really know about anybody else, but I feel like a lot of my spirit has kind of been hibernating over the winter. And now that the days are getting longer and spring is approaching, I feel like it's time to start reawakening certain aspects of myself. And I figured that there are probably others who are feeling the same way lately. So here we are. So what do we know about Aphrodite? I'm sure a lot of us grew up learning that she was part of ancient Greek mythology, was the goddess of love and beauty, and the daughter of Zeus, or Uranus, depending on what version your teacher dove into. Did anyone else experience all of the attractive popular girls wanting to be the one that had their ancient Greek mythology project be about Aphrodite? Did you know that the version that we learned in school was actually a really tame and dumbed down version that doesn't fully encompass everything that she truly is? So, origin story, so to speak. When the world began, it was thanks to the union of Gaia, Mother Earth, and Uranus, the primordial sky deity. From their union, the Titans were born. One Titan, Cronus, eventually grew angry with his father Uranus for spending so much time with Gaia. So one night, he took a sickle and castrated Uranus, throwing his genitals into the sea. Or if it's a more tame version, there was a war between Uranus and the Titans, and a drop of Uranus's blood fell into the sea upon his death. Anyway, the water was made fertile, and the sea began to foam. From the waves and the foam, Aphrodite was born. Not as an infant or a child, but as a fully grown woman. She rode upon a giant scallop shell until she reached land, where she was clothed by the seasons. Everywhere she stepped, flowers and flora sprung from the soil. Now, I tend to lean more toward Hesiod's Theogony over Homer's Iliad when it comes to the origin stories of the Greek gods and goddesses, because the Iliad is more of an epic narrative, where Theogony is likely older, despite being written around the same time as the Iliad, and while also an epic, it gives the genealogy of the Greek pantheon. So, Aphrodite is one of the most ancient Greek goddesses there is, which may contribute to why she's different from pretty much any other Greek goddess. She almost always has freedom of choice, and she's never harmed by any of the male gods or mortals in any of her stories. I mean, she was born as a grown woman from the ocean, and even though she was born around the time that the Titans were, she's technically not a Titan because she wasn't born of the union between Gaia and Uranus. And even though she's generally classified as an Olympian, she's not technically an Olympian either, which makes her basically not bound to the rules of either era, which makes absolute sense, given that she is the goddess of love, beauty, desire, romance, affection, sex, obsession, lust, infatuation, and fertility. Those things have been around almost since the beginning of time, at least for the beings that are capable of those complexities. And it means that she had to have been worshipped before the area came to be known as Greece, when the land was kind of divided into smaller tribes. But because of how she was born, she's also considered to be a sea goddess. There was even a small temple in Cytherea in Greece that was constructed in her honor in roughly the 6th century BCE, and is credited as being the oldest of the temples dedicated to the goddess. In the writings of Pausanias in the 2nd century CE, he says that there was a wooden statue of the goddess that existed there at the time that he was, and in this image of her, she was armed. It's thought that much earlier designations for her image were specific stones that were almost cone-shaped. If you go to Polypaphos in Cyprus, you can see the remains of where the main sanctuary was located. There are a number of small sanctuaries and temples that had been built for venerating and worshipping Aphrodite, and they can be found all over Greece, but there are a number of them at seaports. Now, there's a lot when it comes to who Aphrodite is under all of the layers that history and time have put on her, and there are some links to Astarte and Ishtar or Inanna, and both of whom are likely much more ancient than Aphrodite. And it's possible that she actually is Astarte, but all of this is for another time. She does have links to the mother goddess of ancient India, though, and we'll touch on that a little bit, because I think it's going to be helpful in understanding the full scope of Aphrodite. So, to continue on a bit more with Aphrodite's story, she married Hephaestus, who was a rather unattractive, or at least mildly disabled, god of fire, stonework, metalworking, and the forge. Some versions say that this coupling was Zeus's idea, so that the other male gods would kind of chill out and there'd be less fighting amongst them over her affections. And other versions say that Zeus considered the arranged marriage to be a reward, because Hephaestus released Hera from some, magical timeout throne. Either way, Aphrodite was not happy about it, and frequently sought out relationships with other gods and mortals. One of her main relationships was with Ares, the god of war, violence, and the chaotic, untamed parts of battle. Interesting pairing, but they are both rather untame, chaotic, and raw, just at opposite ends of that spectrum. I guess it's kind of a good girl, bad boy stereotype. Anyway, they had some children: Harmonia, Phobos, Nike, and Demos, or Harmony, Fear, Victory, and Terror. A key story involving Ares has to do with Hephaestus finding out about the affair between Ares and Aphrodite, and he decides to set a trap where, when he catches them in the act, and they are entangled in the net that he made, he calls in all of the gods to witness his finding in an attempt to kind of shame both of them. It doesn't quite work out that way, and the two lovers get released. Poseidon falls in love with Aphrodite, and Hermes claims to envy Ares. Aphrodite returns to the sea, where she was born, in order to renew her virginity by bathing in the sea. And she kind of resolves to never get involved with men again, which doesn't last very long. And she ends up spending a night with Hermes, conceiving a child that she ends up naming Hermaphroditus, to combine both of their names, because the child was born both male and female. She eventually falls for Poseidon as well, because he played a role in getting her released from Hephaestus' net. And then she meets Adonis, who is immortal, and he's eventually killed by Ares out of jealousy. And we talk about that story a little bit in an earlier podcast episode, episode 24, Mullion and Rose Quartz. There are a lot more stories, but this should kind of give you an idea of the level of freedom that she commands for herself. Just because she's married to a god that she didn't have an interest in, and she didn't get to choose that life, she isn't going to let herself drown in that for the rest of her immortal life. So she's free-spirited, maybe a little naive sometimes, and definitely embodies attraction and the complex nature of human desires. But she also demands respect for the power that love has and all of the forms that it can take. She's not above conflict in the name of love, and she's not always gentle with that power. She's a huge part of the divine feminine, primal, ancient, yet nourishing and comforting in the same being. See, the ancient Greeks believed that love is essentially all-powerful. It can create and destroy. At her core, and apart from sex, Aphrodite is about growth, change, and transformation in every relationship. She encourages continuous development, which is evident in her stories: attraction, union, gestation, birth. Her focus is on that transformative power of love. She encourages embracing the new. And this doesn't just apply to procreation of humans, this also applies to creative pursuits. Traditionally, she is aided by her son Eros, who would use his bow and arrow to awaken desire within people. Side note, the Roman counterparts would be Cupid to Eros and Venus to Aphrodite. Now, when we do throw sex into the mix, we have to remember that it was kind of misinterpreted and then kind of demonized over time. Aphrodite's links to the mother goddess of ancient India, or Shakti, have to do with a particular custom, where some temples practiced sacred sexuality, and kind of bound the female practitioners to the goddess so that they could learn and teach sacred sexuality and sacred ecstasy. It was a form of spiritual training, similar to the practices in other cultures such as ancient Egypt and ancient China. Sacred sex was even a thing in ancient Celtic cultures to, a certain extent. The ancient tantric practices from India made their way to Cyprus and into Aphrodite's sanctuaries just fine, but over time the original teachings and meanings of the practice became diluted, distorted, and some of it was even lost. Misinterpretations led early Christians to believe that Cyprus was populated wholly by demon offspring, because they were unable to understand that the practices weren't just about the sex itself, but the uniting of spiritual energies, to be able to heal, to transform, to open up the mind, to open up the consciousness, and to receive messages from the universe and connect with the divine feminine. And this is kind of where the Aphrodite archetype comes from. We all have a bit of Aphrodite archetype in there somewhere. So let's break down that archetype a bit. So because the Aphrodite archetype governs a person's enjoyment of love, sensuality, beauty, and sexuality, awakening the archetype happens when we fully immerse ourselves into the sensations of now. And they don't even have to be sexual. The breeze on your skin, the warmth of a fire, or the surge of electric energy when you see someone you're attracted to, or even feeling the flow and energy of music. She's about curiosity, generosity of heart, focused attention, and bringing dreams to reality. The things that are important to this archetype are feelings, intensity, and variety, whether that's with a lover, within a friendship, or a creative pursuit or project. She demands all-around expression. Some symbols that you can use to help awaken the archetype, or when working with the goddess, are the dove, which symbolizes the gentle, nurturing aspect of love, the sparrow, which symbolizes profound spiritual connection, as well as intense, loving devotion. The swan symbolizes grace, purity, and the harmonious nature of love. Roses symbolize passion, romance, and immortality. Mirrors, which symbolize introspection, self-reflection, and the revelation of divine truth. The girdle, which is kind of an embroidered belt, and it symbolizes the power of the womb and the transformation from maiden to woman to cosmic being. The sea, which is the infinite vital energy, and it can also symbolize the subconscious. And then there's the white cone, and it kind of looks like a circle on top of a triangle. It's associated with all of the great fertility goddesses, and symbolizes the ascent from sexuality to spirituality. Living with the Aphrodite archetype awakened, there's a number of qualities that will come to the surface, such as being independent but vulnerable, and not in a negative way. Being artful in relationships, like acting with emotional intelligence and treating the relationship as this ever-evolving masterpiece rather than just some transactional agreement. Focusing on what is personally meaningful. Being willing to feel the full spectrum of emotions within a relationship. Being creative and pushing for transformation and change for the better. Being resilient and positive. Understanding that whimsy can be misinterpreted as shallow or frivolous. And being highly desirable by making others feel amazing in your presence. And you don't even have to be trying. Like, the energy or the vibe that comes off of you makes you effortlessly charismatic. There's an aura around you that kind of draws people in, like moths, despite themselves. Now, there's a few different ways that this archetype can appear, or manifest. First one would be the lover. Desirable, desiring. It's the weak at the knees, butterflies in the stomach, intense focus on that one person. This one can be addictive, though, dangerously so, because of that surge of electric energy. There's the alchemical goddess, and she sees things clearly and can decipher both the known and the unknown. She focuses her attention on love and allows herself to be positively transformed by it. And she also knows that existence is never ending. It's a constant, changing process of creation. And the last is the creator, the provider of love and passion. She's big on allowing the creative spirit to flow and thrive and blossom. She's all about taking your dreams and turning them into reality. So why tap into this archetype? Why awaken her? It's about awakening your passion, not just sexual passion, but your passion for the creative, for life itself. She asks you to open up and pay attention to all of your senses. Be more in the moment in a lot of aspects of your life. She can teach you to seek relationships that are stabilizing and empowering, rather than ones that are always keeping you on anxious alert and stifling you at the same time. She asks us to honor the rituals of femininity. And don't really rise at me. I'm talking about intentional self-care, blending softness with strength, nurturing your inner identity as well as the outer expression. How do you adorn your body? How do you treat those around you? However you express yourself creatively. Do they all match the inner self? But also kind of flipping off societal shame surrounding aging and how the body changes as we age. and connecting with nature and embracing its natural cycles rather than fighting against it. Working with Aphrodite as a deity is pretty similar, but let's talk about that anyway for those who feel called to work with her. I would recommend starting by getting to know her mythology, her history, and her lore. You don't have to cram all of that info into your brain at once before you go any further, but read as much as you can about her from as many different sources as you can. And you can do this over time as you continue to work with her. It shows her that you're invested in knowing who she really is and what she's about. Don't forget to keep in mind that some of her stories may have been misinterpreted through time, whether intentionally or not. It's a bit of an experimental process, so it's going to look different for everyone, but showing her respect is critical. She is a goddess after all, and she's not all love and light. So if she feels slighted or used, she can get a little cranky about it. Some ways to invite her in and establish a connection with her would be rose quartz. If you were tuned in for episode 24, then you know that she has a connection to this crystal. You can use it for self-love, emotional healing, romance, and heart chakra work. You can meditate with her, put on some music that you can do some rhythmic dancing to, add in some chanting if it feels right, and remember that she loves full expression and being fully engaged in the now. You can use rose water. It's said to have the highest vibrational frequency, and roses are sacred to Aphrodite, so anything rose-related is great. You can use it as a mist before a meditation or however feels right. You can use rose essential oil, going along with more rose-related things. Rose oil is great in baths for self-love rituals and can be used in shower steamers if you and your partner want to have a steamy experience. You can also use it to anoint your heart chakra before bed. Learn the languages of love, which are words of affirmation, receiving gifts, quality time, acts of service, and physical touch. Learn the languages of sex, which are fun, desire, pleasure, patience, and acceptance. And learn the languages of self-love, which are pretty much the same as the love languages, just directed at the self. You can use jasmine incense for love and sensuality. You can use orange blossom incense to uplift and call in prosperity. You can use rose incense for love, beauty, and romance. Vanilla incense to enhance the senses. Frankincense incense for spiritual connection. You can study Tantra, learn its origins, its history, and study sacred sexuality. Barbara Carellis has a great book called Urban Tantra, which I highly recommend. You can try communicating with her during meditation, but just also remember to listen and be aware of any responses that she might give you. You can do things like showing up for yourself or your loved ones or your community or the environment, putting love into certain acts. You can keep a journal tracking what devotions or communications you've done, if they worked, if they didn't work, experiences that are connected to her, any messages that you received from her, how they were received, and so on. Days that are sacred to her that you may consider incorporating into your practices are Beltane, which goes from April 30th to May 1st, full moons during the summer, Fridays, Valentine's Day, your own birthday, yours and your partner's anniversary, and Aphrodisia, which was an ancient Greek celebration of Aphrodite that took place sometime between mid-July and mid-August. Now, I do want to talk some about sex magic, but there's so much info that we're only going to be able to cover a small portion of it today in comparison, because we are already at the limit, so this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode. But first of all, the big burning question: what is sex magic? I mean, we've talked a little bit about it so far already, without actually calling it sex magic. A lot of people mistakenly think that it's all evil or taboo or just bad. They assume things like orgies and ceremonial sex with an audience, ritually imbibing sexual fluids, or casting a sex magic spell on someone without their knowledge, that kind of thing. Granted, there are, or were, probably somebody out there somewhere in history that did include things like that in their practices, but that's not anywhere near the sum of all of it. So a really short definition would be this: any sexual activity that is used in a ritual, magical, or spiritual pursuit. It has roots through thousands of years of humanity, and it has always been either a solo act or a couples act. Very rarely was it ever a group setting type deal. It's generally a very intimate ritual. So we're going to explore some more of history, because sex magic gets a bad rap that it doesn't deserve. So, ancient Egypt, 4000 BCE. This is when the earliest known records of sex magic popped up. It was about the deep connection to the divine. See, death was highly respected, and as we see time and again in how they buried the poor of their society, by leaving at the very least the minimum things that those that died would need as they went into the afterlife. So, because death was so highly respected, life had to be respected as well, because you can't have death without first having life. And so sex was respected, because that's how life comes into existence. It was viewed as this very spiritual interaction. There was no such thing as a stigma attached to things like premarital sex or children out of wedlock, or even, for the most part, same-sex relationships. Those were mostly weaponized by patriarchal powers later on. Women were held in much higher esteem as divine beings that bring forth life, and they were allowed more legal rights than what people would generally expect from an ancient culture. Heka was the magic force of nature that could be utilized by priests, priestesses, midwives, and nurses. The midwives and nurses would intertwine it with their fertility and birthing rituals. And Bes is the god of music, dance, and sexual pleasure. Basically all of the body feel-good stuff. And we'll talk about him another time. So fast forward to ancient Greece and Rome, specifically from 323 to 31 BCE. This was when sex magic rituals in ancient Greece started transitioning into something that was much more harmful and destructive. It's also when Aphrodite began to lose much of her representation as a goddess that was so much more than just sex and uncontrollable lust and female fickleness. This is the Hellenistic period. Now there was philia, which was love magic that was meant to foster affection and harmony and repair failing relationships, so not all of it was considered bad, but eros was what was used when someone was aiming for quote-unquote erotic seizure. It was primarily men that used this magic, and it's a bunch of sinister and controlling yuckiness that was meant to cause constant emotional turmoil and intense desire until the target submitted to the caster. There's one of these effigy dolls that has survived and is in decent condition, and if you want to look it up, go for it, but it was used for tormenting a woman that wasn't catering to the man that made it. The effigy is clearly female, with pins in her eyes, mouth, ears, heart, hands, bottoms of her feet, and between her legs, both front and rear. Oh, and the effigy is bound in this, submissive pose, which gives it even more yuck. I can only imagine how much of a prick the man that made it was. Anyway, unfortunately, this ideology persisted throughout the medieval period, often through the filters of Christian demonology and misinterpretation. Meanwhile, the Taoists in ancient China, roughly 206 BCE, recognized the importance of having balanced energies. The divine feminine energy is all throughout Taoism, along with the divine masculine energy. One isn't greater or more important than the other. They did believe that women were able to have a stronger spiritual connection to nature because of a woman's ability to create life and bring it into the world, and because of that, women were respected as ones who held the higher secrets of the Tao. Sacred sex became part of the practices within just a few years, viewed as a unification. And then it quickly became ritualized, where sex lasted for long periods, and the focus was on physical movements following the breath, which is to say, movements that were slow, deliberate, aiming to foster a deep energetic connection and to circulate the chi, or life force. And it was carried on that way for at least another 400 years. And for the Taoists, female orgasms became sanctified, because the belief was that male orgasms meant he loses a little bit of his chi every time. The more chi you lose, the closer you are to death. Women, however, don't lose chi during orgasm and can, in fact, release beneficial chi, kind of like extra chi. And since female orgasms are more powerful and more profound than male, the man can orgasm and then absorb the extra chi from the woman as long as she also has an orgasm. And then we fast forward again into India's tantric practices, roughly 500 CE. The belief is that the energy of the world and the energy of the self are all very much connected. In fact, all of existence is interconnected. Tantric practices can be individualized to suit each person's own energy, so it rarely looks the same from person to person. Tantra celebrates everything that encompasses life, and tantric sex is the sacred expression of cosmic energy. It's about slowing down, bringing awareness to the body, staying present within the breath, focusing on the process rather than the end goal, and building a deeper energetic connection. It's often associated with couples a lot today, but it can be an individual experience to help build self-care habits and release traumas. Fast forward yet again to the 12th and 13th century CE, Kabbalah. Mystical Judaism is a branch of Judaism, and it's often referred to as Kabbalah, or tradition, or receiving, I think is the other translation. It goes further into esoteric, spiritual, and experiential material than just your mainstream Judaism does. It focuses on understanding the nature of God, the soul, and the universe. One of the beliefs is that each soul contains a piece of the divine. And there were two main rituals that would be performed that would imitate or recreate the original act of creation. One was domestic sacred sexuality, which would take place between a married couple. The practice was considered to mirror, repair, and to help sustain the divine energy of the cosmos. But it was also one where intention was a big part of the act. The focus had to be on love, divine connection, and ensuring that both partners were satisfied, because otherwise it was mundane and it didn't contribute to sustaining the divine energy. And the second was walking meditations that kind of hinted at maybe finding a spot out in nature to practice some of that sustaining of the divine energy. Some of the texts imply that being out in nature during the sacred act had the potential to heighten the spiritual connection. Both rituals were meant to temporarily mend the separation of genders and to end human exile. And we're going to fast forward one more time to the late 19th and 20th centuries. Westernization. Paschal Beverly Randolph, who was alive from the mid to late 1800s, was credited with bringing the practice of sex magic into the Western world. He emphasized that an orgasm was the most powerful experience a person can have, and that it's a moment when, quote, the soul opens to the divine, end quote. He was particular in stating that each partner has to have an orgasm, preferably at the same time, in order for the magic to be successful. He also stated that the magic couldn't just be performed with anyone. It has to be with someone who knows what's going on, is familiar with sex magic, hasn't been paid to participate, is a willing participant, and is not bound to a situation where guilt could factor in during or after. And they have to have the same goal for the magic in mind. Also in that time frame was Aleister Crowley, who was around in the first half of the 1900s. And he expanded on the Ordo Templi Orientis' teachings of sex magic after he was sworn in at the 9th degree in the order. He was controversial for a number of reasons, And one of those was that he embraced sex magic at a time when even just talking about sex was taboo. Kind of a purity culture thing that was going on. I know that term is generally used for like the 1990s to 2000s, but I feel like it kind of reared its head back then too. The ideas of purity and abstinence and denial of sexual desires and sexuality are actually pretty recent considering the entire lifetime of living beings that have complex brains. Most of the sex and sexual desire is bad comes from late antiquity, when the patriarchy and Catholicism began to reign and sex became weaponized. Now, the best sex magic practice that I can give you actually belongs to Layla Martin, who is from This Tantric Life. She has a YouTube video podcast called My Most Powerful Sex Magic Ritual. It's episode 59. And I highly suggest that you go look it up if you want a specific ritual to try out, because the one that she gives you in that video can be tweaked to fit you personally. Wow, that was a long one, and we barely scratched the surface. So we're going to end here for now. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. Tune in next time for some talk on planting a witch's garden. I can't wait to share it with you. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, on Instagram, _witchful_journey, on BlueSky at awitchfuljourney.bsky.social, and on YouTube, A Witchful Journey. I enjoy hearing from listeners, so if you pop in, say hi, leave me a rating or a review, and if you feel called to contribute, donate, or buy me my next podcast coffee, whatever you want to call it, check out A Witchful Journey on Ko-fi.com. That's KOFI.com. You can also send stories or experiences to awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey.